There's always going to be income inequality. In a free market, in capitalism, people are not equal, right? I mean, they're equal under the law, right? That
Mm.
is a tenet of government, that everybody is equal under the eyes of the law. But we're all not equal in our abilities, in our intelligence, in our drive, in our goals. And so there are going to be people that are more successful than other people. And so they're going to be wealthier. I mean, that's just what you're going to have. But under capitalism, the beauty of capitalism is even the poor people can be rich relative to how they would be in another system. And in fact, the poorest people in America today live better than the richest people did hundreds of years ago, right? If you look at all of the things that capitalism has produced that have increased the quality of life. Hundreds of years ago, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to be wealthy enough to afford to have a live band play for you, right? You couldn't just, go on the internet and listen to stuff. So a lot of things that you had to be rich to have,
Mm-hmm.
now everybody has them. I mean, I remember when the first cell phone came out, I didn't even want to buy one because I couldn't afford it. The first, I remember I went to a store and I saw this high def television in like a Best Buy or something, and I was probably maybe in my 30s, early, and I couldn't believe the picture, how great it was, but I couldn't afford it. It was like $10,000, which was a lot of money back then. It's still a lot of money, but it was a lot more money in the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reason that everybody's got a television, high def television, the reason that even people on welfare have cell phones now is because capitalism made them more abundant and less expensive. But income inequality today is actually higher than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because of the monetary policy that the Federal Reserve has pursued. And as a result of that, we have an extreme income inequality that is not the natural byproduct of capitalism, and which is a problem.
Mm.
But the solution isn't for the government to try to redistribute the wealth from the rich to the poor. That always backfires, and that will lead to even greater income inequality. What we have to do is change the monetary policy that has enriched the few at the expense of the many.
Mm.
And because what the government has been doing is that they've been fueling inflation. They've been running huge deficits, printing a lot of money, creating a lot of inflation. The beneficiaries of that inflation are primarily the wealthy who own assets and who are able to leverage those assets with cheap money and to achieve more wealth. But the middle class and the poor suffer because all they end up with is higher prices for the goods and services that they buy.
Mm.
And they're also encouraged to go deeper into debt to afford to pay those bills. And so instead of building wealth, they build debt.
Mm.
And they get poorer and poorer as they continue to borrow money to consume. And in the meantime, a lot of the money that should be invested productively, that would result in a higher standard of living for everybody, that would create more goods and services and lower prices, we end up just fueling speculative bubbles on Wall Street. And so that the policies that are being pursued are exacerbating the income inequality, and they're undermining the collective standard of living. And also the government perpetuates poverty with the welfare system that we have, where people are paid basically not to be productive, and it breeds a culture of dependency. And we have a lot of things like the minimum wage law and occupational licensing and payroll taxes and regulations that make it very difficult for people that don't have skills to get jobs. And the most important thing for somebody who doesn't have a skill is to get a job, because on-the-job training is the best way to get skills. And the more skills you have, the more money you can earn. But if the government erects a lot of barriers to make it harder to get that first job, then you never get on the economic ladder. And so a lot of people have been trapped in poverty because of the welfare state and a lot of these regulations that in some cases are well-intentioned, but they backfire.
I really love that you explained all this because I feel like it foreshadows our conversation later, because I'm going to ask you about why you feel we're in a bubble economy and economic policies and the Trump administration and what you foresee is going to happen with all of that. But first, I really want to stick on this like high earner 1% topic. And I want to understand what you think is misunderstood about one percenters, and also how do they bolster the economy, these one percenters?
Well, most people who get wealthy do it because they have, created something of value, honestly, right? I mean, obviously, there could be a thief that could just steal something and then he gets rich dishonest. But if I start a business, and that's the way most people achieve wealth, they start a business. And when you have a business, you can't force anybody to be your customer. They have to choose. They have to voluntarily buy whatever it is that you're selling. And people will always act in their own self-interest. And so if I start a business and now people want to buy stuff from me, it's because whatever I'm selling makes their lives better.
Mm-hmm.
And they value what I'm selling more than the money that they're paying me to provide them with. And so that's a good thing, because in capitalism, the more money you earn, by definition, the more people that you've helped, you've improved their lives. You've given them a better product at a higher quality or at a lower price. And they voluntarily gave you their money that they worked hard to earn. They gave you that money to buy your product or utilize your service. And generally in the process, if I'm going to create a business, I usually can't do it all by myself. I need help. I have to hire some people to help me. And so now I'm creating employment opportunities because a lot of people can't start their own business. They don't have the savings, the capital, they don't have the know-how, and they can't afford to take the risk. When you start a business, you may not make any money. I mean, there's a lot of risk associated with setting up a business. And usually you have to put up money in order to do it. And you may lose. In fact, most businesses fail. That means the people who start the businesses lose money, but their employees don't lose money. When you hire somebody to work, you got to give them a salary, a wage, whether you make money or not. If you rent office space, you got to pay the landlord, whether you make any money or not. So the business owner, the entrepreneur, is the last person to get paid. And he's usually the hardest working. I know when I started my business, I was the first one there, and I turned off the lights at night. I worked harder than anybody. And for the first several years, I made no money. So there's not a lot of people that are willing to put in that kind of effort. Some people don't want to work 14-hour days. They want to work for 8 hours. They want to take the weekends off. When you own your own business, you never have a weekend off. Even if you're not at work, you're still working. So it's very difficult to be a successful entrepreneur, but it's very important. And if you succeed, you deserve all the money that you make. And the more money you make, the more people you've helped. You've improved their lives, or you wouldn't make any money. And the other beauty of capitalism is if I set up a business and I don't make any money, that means I've failed. That means, my efforts have not produced any real value, meaning I hired people to work who could have worked someplace else, but I took that labor, which is not unlimited. I took some scarce labor. Maybe I rented some space. I used some materials. I used scarce resources, and I couldn't produce a product or a service that I could sell at a profit. That means the people don't value what I'm doing as much as it's costing me to produce it. And so I'm net destroying value. And so I go out of business. But if I succeed, I stay in business and I make money. But that's how capitalism works. That's how resources get efficiently allocated. That's why socialist countries are broke. Communist countries have nothing. The people starve because you don't have a profit motive. You don't have the right incentives. When you have a bunch of bureaucrats in government trying to figure out what people want, it can't work. You need to have individual entrepreneurs incentivized by profit in order to have an efficient allocation of resources, in order to create anything, in order to invent anything. People, operate in their own self-interest. So if I know that if I start a business and I do something good, I could get rich, well then I'm going to do it, right? But if I don't have that incentive, then why should I take the risk? Why should I put in all the effort if I can't benefit from that.
Yeah.
And so you can't look at somebody who's wealthy and think that, oh, they're a bad person, they're an evil person. They're not. You know, the people who have helped us the most. I mean, everybody, you look, oh, I've got this iPhone that I really like. Well, you think you'd have an iPhone if Steve Jobs and his early investors couldn't make any money creating those products? The problem isn't the wealthy people in the free market. It's the wealthy people in government. It's people who get rich off of government, because that's the problem, because government isn't about, voluntary transactions. Government is about force. A businessman can't take your money away from you. A businessman has to earn your money. He has to convince you to spend your money at his business as opposed to somebody else's. And he can only do that by offering you a better deal. Government takes your money by force. Government says, you have to give me your money whether you like it or not. And so that's what people have to be afraid of, big government.